This is Jonathan Reutenberg, and you're listening to Let's Talk About Things. Really excited to be recording this show today. Later on I'll be interviewing a friend of mine, so please stay tuned for that. But first, let's talk about things. In a time like this when there's a global pandemic, being a small government conservative can be pretty difficult. This past Friday, Congress passed yet another stimulus bill, which was signed by President Trump. Nothing like a pandemic to bring both parties together to raise spending. This is not to say that there is no role for Congress in mitigating the effects of COVID-19, but it doesn't exactly help that we went into this pandemic running trillion-dollar deficits and $23 trillion in debt. So I think it's important that we remember our small government conservative roots, because on the whole, that is a great model for the United States. But there is one person who has taken things to an extreme. Dr. Adrian Vermeule is a Harvard law professor, and he wrote an article the other day in The Atlantic advocating for the replacement of originalism with common good constitutionalism. For those who are not familiar, originalism at its basic core is the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted as it was understood when it was adopted. It recognizes that the Founding Fathers had wisdom when they enacted the plan that they did, that the plan that they enacted is sound, and that if changes do need to be made, there is a process that one can go through to do that, namely Article 5. But Dr. Vermeule insists that originalism has served its purpose, and it should be replaced now with what he calls common good constitutionalism. Now, I'm not sure if I can really debate a Harvard law professor, so I'm going to try to keep this as basic as I possibly can, but I'll give it my best shot. Essentially, common good constitutionalism asserts that the role of government and the constitutional order is to protect and serve the common good rather than protect individual rights and autonomy. Some of the basic principles involved include respect for the authority of rule and of rulers, respect for hierarchy, and a candid willingness to legislate morality, which, by the way, contradicts an idea that was given by the intellectual godfather of modern American conservatism, Senator Barry Goldwater. He argued that you cannot legislate morality. And yes, I am aware that he was using that argument specifically to buttress his opposition to the Civil Rights Act, but the fact that he misapplied the principle does not, in my opinion, negate the validity of the principle itself. According to Dr. Vermeule, common good constitutionalism should allow for rulers to rule efficiently and not to protect individual liberties, and it is not suspect of strong rule the way that classical liberalism is. But suspicion of strong rule is not a classical liberal idea, it's an American idea. The American Revolution was fought on the grounds that Great Britain was ruling over the colonies with an iron fist, not listening to the complaints of the colonists. And so the colonists rebelled and successfully won their right to self-determination. The idea of strong government being ideal cuts at the core of what it means to be American. Dr. Vermeule is also open about the fact that things like freedom of speech, the right to engage in consensual relations with an adult, and property rights and economic rights as they are currently understood would disappear under such a constitutional framework. And there would be a powerful executive branch, quote-unquote, protecting people from free markets, employers, and corporations who would have the gall to treat them as individuals. Now, I have never been one for litmus tests, but in my opinion, Dr. Vermeule's legal theory would in effect create a conservatism that is in fact the opposite of what conservatism has stood for. Individualism, individual rights, individual liberty, small government. And I think that we need a return to these basic principles. We need to insist that anyone who believes that government isn't big or powerful enough, doesn't regulate the economy enough, and that individual liberties need to be restricted, is not a conservative. I get that people are scared. When pandemics like this happen, people look for strong government. But strong government isn't necessarily good government. We should want government to be small so that when this pandemic is over, it doesn't have the power to regulate our lives the way it is now. I get the appeal that socialism has had in making big government popular, making market hating popular, but we as conservatives should not seek to emulate that. We believe in small government, they don't. We believe in individual rights, they don't believe in some individual rights. We believe in a separation of powers, they use executive orders to do what they want. We should distinguish ourselves from the left and not seek to emulate them. And I worry that the way things are going right now, that big government interventionism in the economy, and limiting individual rights are becoming more popular on both sides of the aisle, and that there will be no one who will be left to articulate the ideas that I've laid out here. Anyway, we've got a great interview coming up, so stick with us. We'll be right back.
So, if you are a political junkie, you might have been following the elections in Pennsylvania this past year. It's actually worth noting that there were diverging results in both the east and west ends of the state. While Democrats came to power in the Philadelphia suburbs, Republicans took power in the collar counties surrounding Pittsburgh. But within Allegheny County itself, there was a political shift of a different sort. And joining me is the woman responsible for that shift, Allegheny County Councilor in her first year, Bethany Hallam. Bethany, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really glad to have you. I'm so glad to have you as my first guest on this show.
I'm glad to be your first guest. I'm really excited.
So let's start off with your ascendancy to elected office. You ran against a 20-year incumbent. How and why did you decide to run?
My backstory plays a lot into the whole reason behind why I decided to run for office, right? So I had always been interested in politics, but I never really knew how to take it to where I wanted to go, right? So, I spent a decade battling substance use disorder from the time I was 16 till the time I was 26. I ended up in our county jail. And it was then when I really had a clear mind for the first time ever. I mean, my time in jail was the first time in over a decade that I had been completely free of drugs, alcohol, any mind-altering substances, and really just had a clear mind to think about what it was I wanted to do in life, and looking around the jail at that time and just seeing so many people who were in there, not because they were bad people, but for crimes of survival, right? People who were breaking the law just to survive, to provide for their family, to have shelter. And I realized that how truly dysfunctional our criminal justice system was. And so that's when I started looking into county politics. And I started looking at who has the authority to decide how our criminal justice system in Allegheny County is run. Who has the authority to make sure that the conditions in the jail are livable, are humane? Who has the authority to make sure that we have clean air and clean water? Who has the authority to protect the people of Allegheny County? And I realized that was Allegheny County Council. And so I decided to run for office, and everybody thought I was, what was I doing? Where did I come up with this idea? Am I sure this is something I want to do? And a lot of people laughed in my face when I told them I was running for county council, especially the at-large seat that represents all of Allegheny County, right? I have one of the largest legislative districts in the entire country, representing almost 1.3 million people. And so, I realized that this was my opportunity. Instead of just sitting on social media and complaining about all the things wrong with society, I could run for office and actually have the chance to have the seat at the table to make the changes that I knew were so desperately needed. So that's what I did, and I won.
And when you did, it's worth noting that just the year before, in 2018, there were two members of the Democratic establishment in the PA House of Representatives who both lost to progressive challengers, now Representative Summer Lee and now Representative Sarah Innamorato. And did the victories of these two representatives inspire you to run?
Oh, definitely. So I actually have a unique relationship with Representative Innamorato because we actually went to the same high school. You know, I've known her since long before politics. Her sister and I were very close friends through high school. And so whenever I saw that she and Representative Lee were running together, they were just running unapologetically, right? They were just running as regular folks running to represent their community. And the cousins that they beat, you know, it was two cousins. Their last name was Costa, a very, very well-known name in Allegheny County politics. And they had been in office for almost 2 decades. And again, it was the same thing with Sarah and Summer, was that people saw them and said, you can never beat these establishment candidates. You can't beat the Costas. They have all the money and they have all the support. How are you going to beat them? And Sarah and Summer both overwhelmingly beat their opponent and went on to represent us in the PA State House. So when very early on in my campaign, I had people saying the same things to me, I knew that it could be done because I saw Sarah and Summer do it. They truly paved the way for progressives in Allegheny County. And so I think that it changed the narrative and it made us realize, you know, as a progressive, especially progressive women in Allegheny County, you don't have to have all the money in the world. You don't have to have a famous last name. You don't have to have every elected official in your district endorsing you. What you need is the power of the people. And that's what Summer and Sarah had. That's what myself and my fellow council member, Liv Bennett, we ran together. That's what we had. And that's how we win. It's the people power is worth so much more than anything else. You cannot put a valuation on that.
So I definitely want to get to the topic that's on everyone's minds. But first, you mentioned your struggle with addiction and how it landed you in the Allegheny County criminal justice system. Did that experience inform your policy views and your policy priorities?
Oh, definitely. My entire experience battling substance use disorder is something that I bring to the table every single day because it's such a unique perspective. You know, having been in the jail, having been in the streets, right? Having been homeless, having not known where my next meal was going to come from. You know, I lived a life that a lot of people don't ever experience, but yet know someone who is going through it and they can't necessarily relate. So something that's so important to me, I think, is ending the stigma surrounding substance use disorder. And that's one of the reasons why I make sure to talk about it everywhere I go, because it's one thing to legislate around harm reduction, around making sure that people have access to the things that they need to overcome their battles with substance use disorder. Like, that's one thing. But it's another thing to talk about it so regularly and so almost nonchalant that people realize that they should be talking about it like that too, right? So when I first, got into drugs, it wasn't as widely talked about as it is now. You know, the overdose epidemic wasn't yet a thing that people were talking about regularly, but yet it wasn't new, right? So the crack epidemic ravaged communities, especially lower income and especially Black communities all across the country, you know, more than a decade before I started my battle with drugs, right? And so the fact that happened to a specific community and nobody talked about it to this day, right? And then suddenly the overdose epidemic becomes prevalent in our communities. And why are people talking about it? Why are you hearing about it on the news? Well, it's because now it's affecting the white communities. It's affecting these middle and upper class white communities. And suddenly people are talking about it more. So I realized that I should use this unique opportunity to take it a step further. I have a platform to be able to talk about things that are so important to so many different community members. And I realize that it's my job to take the message everywhere I go. So even if I'm in a room, even if I'm talking, giving a talk or a lecture or on a panel about something that you would think has nothing to do with substance use disorder, I always make sure that I bring that up, because it's so important for people to hear someone, especially someone who looks like me, right? People all the time when they hear my story for the first time are shocked. Like, oh, you're not what I thought that someone battling substance use disorder looked like. That's my whole point. My whole point is that you don't know what that person looks like, because it isn't a look, right? It's a disease in all shapes and sizes and socioeconomic statuses and ethnicities and races and genders and sexual orientations. Everyone is affected by this. There is no one who is excluded from being affected by substance use disorder, whether it's themselves or whether it's someone they know and love. And more often than not, those people end up inside our jails and prisons. And that's the perspective that I bring, and that's why it's so important to talk about, because people battling substance use disorder do not belong in jail and prison. They do not belong in the criminal justice system. They belong getting help, getting the help that they need, getting the help that they deserve, getting the help that seems so rare across all different communities. It's so hard for people to get the help they need once they admit that they need it, because that's the first step. But until we end that stigma, until we make people comfortable talking about substance use disorder, we're going to continue to have this problem of people not being able to get help and not even being willing to seek the help because they don't feel comfortable exposing themselves to that level. And so that's kind of what I try to do every day, is remind people that someone you know is suffering with substance use disorder right now. Someone that you know or a friend of a friend is incarcerated right now because of their battles with substance use disorder or other mental health diagnoses. Someone you know, you have to break it down to the fact that you know someone, you are affected by this, and that is why you need to care about it. And so, again, I really do feel like it's my job to talk about it everywhere I go. And that's what I do.
Definitely. And I can say it's something that affects everyone. I'm not sure if I know someone, if I know someone who doesn't know someone who is struggling with that. And, hearing you talk about your story my hope is that it will encourage people who are struggling with addiction to seek treatment, to turn to family for help, and to turn to friends for help, turn to anyone they know who can help them, because I think that it takes a village to be able to cure something, not cure, but treat something like that. Yeah. So let's talk about the coronavirus, and why don't we start light, and we can get more policy substantive. How are you personally coping with being stuck inside all day?
Oh, it is for me. I am the most outgoing person that I know. I really do thrive being in social settings. I thrive being able to go out and talk to my constituents. I thrive on that kind of thing. It's one of my favorite things about what it is that I do, is just being able to talk to people and that face-to-face social interaction. And that's what I'm really struggling with right now. I mean, a lot of meetings have been adapted where we're having them via conference call, via Zoom. We are making adjustments to still have county council meetings, whether it's our regular meeting or committee meeting. A lot of the in-person meetings that I would be having with people right now are being done via technology. And so it's just not the same. So I'm definitely struggling with it. I'm finding ways to keep busy because there's so much work to be done as an elected official right now. Like I said, I definitely didn't, when I was running for this office, didn't realize that 3 months in, I'd be dealing with a global pandemic, right? That wasn't something that I foresaw happening. But yet here we are. And whether you've been in office for 3 months or 30 years, I think we can all agree that this is new for everyone. And so we're all dealing with it and figuring out how to best serve our constituents and our communities in the best way possible right now. And so, I'm really working on it, and I'm learning, and we're learning together. So I think that's one of the most important parts, is that we're all figuring this out together right now.
I think that I can speak for many when I say that one of the things that's helping me get through the social distancing is hashtag watch Bethany eat on your Instagram. Anyway, you talked about earlier your experience with the criminal justice system, and you pointed out that coronavirus is spreading in the Allegheny County jail systems and presumably jail systems all across the United States. And what do you think needs to be done about that?
Oh, I think a lot that needs to be done. So first of all, we announced our first case within the Allegheny County Jail within the past couple days. We had a corrections officer who tested positive. So that was our first confirmed case in the jail. You know, there's a lot of discussion about are there incarcerated people right now in the jail who have tested positive? They've been consolidating pods, moving people to other pods to free up what they're calling quarantine spaces. You know, we've released over 600 incarcerated people already. But I think what's important to note is we can't just pat ourselves on the back for that and act like the job is done. You know, our courts and our public defender's office have been working really hard to get those people out. But unfortunately, you know, we talk a lot about flattening the curve right now. Well, one of the curves that I've been seeing flattened is the release of people from our jail, right? That's one curve that we don't want to flatten, right? We want it to keep going up. We want to keep releasing people because the less people who are incarcerated, the more chance we have of flattening the curve of confirmed cases in the jail, right? So what we have called for, I introduced legislation a week or so ago. We're introducing a motion of council at our next meeting, which is next week. And we're calling for specific populations of the jail to be released. So now what a lot of people don't realize about when people talk about jail reform and criminal justice reform is that actually the majority of people in jails have not been convicted of a crime, right? So in our criminal justice system, it has and always will be innocent until proven guilty. But in the Allegheny County Jail, 81% of the people in there have not been convicted of a crime. They're either awaiting trial, they have a bond that's been assessed that they cannot afford to pay, or they are serving a detainer. They have been served a detainer, which means that they're being held on a technical parole or probation violation. So that could be someone who missed the curfew or missed an appointment with their probation officer or failed a drug test for marijuana, which is now legal in lots of places. You know, so we are holding people in jail these are not criminals. These are people who are safer at home with their families, but instead they're stuck in this petri dish that is the Allegheny County Jail. And the Allegheny County Jail is not unique. If you look at jails all across the country, they're like that. One of the most prominent cases right now has been, I don't know if you've heard of Rikers Island, what's going on there right now.
Of course.
Yes, their cases are exploding. And so the rate of their incarcerated population on Rikers Island is 10 times as high as the rate of the rate of infection of people who are not incarcerated in New York City, right? So it's just a perfect example of what will happen at jails all across the country if we don't stop this now. And the only way to stop the spread of the coronavirus in jail is to release enough people. So 600 is a start. You know, we need to double that. We need to make sure that anybody who is serving a sentence is able to do so in a single cell by themselves. Because one of the largest problems in jail is the fact that people are serving in a 6 foot by 8 foot cell. Okay. And there's 2 people per cell. So now the CDC's guidelines say 6 feet, right? We've all heard it a million times, 6 feet social distancing rule. You cannot social distance when there's 2 people in a 6 by 8 cell. It's mathematically impossible. And then add on to that the lack of cleaning supplies, the lack of hygiene products, the lack of accessibility to either of those things when you need them, right? I mean, there's a pod in the jail right now that doesn't have toothbrushes. There's people who don't have soap. Toilet paper is being rationed. And you know, I feel for them. And I think that that's why this issue right now is so personal to me, because I'm not just thinking about the people who are incarcerated, right? I'm thinking about the workers in the jail. Those are county employees. And what happens to them if they get the virus from an incarcerated person? Then they bring that home to their family and they spread it throughout their community. I do not want incarcerated people or the workers to get sick. And so the only way that we can stop that is by taking these advanced measures to ensure that more people are released to the safety of their family. And I feel for them, like I said, because I've been there. And I know how horrible it is to be incarcerated during normal times. I can't fathom what it's like during a worldwide pandemic. It's truly scary. And so I feel like it's my job to stand up for those people who feel like nobody's fighting for them.
Incredible. And you actually partially answered one of my next questions, which was policies that could actually help. I guess I'll ask you, in terms of policies on the outside of the jail, so in terms of the rest, those of us who are not incarcerated, which policies do you think that are being proposed on either the federal or state or county level that would help mitigate the COVID-19?
There's a lot of different things. Something that my fellow counselor and I have discussed, Liv Bennett and I have discussed, is putting, sanitizing stations, things of those nature around the county, like on the streets, things like that. So definitely social distancing is the most important thing that anyone can do. But, a concern that I've had brought up over and over again to me is that people don't actually know what social distancing means, right? So we see, if we go for a drive through one of our county parks, there are thousands of people on the trails, right? There are tons of people on the playground. There's people out playing organized sports. And so people don't understand, like, they know they can't go to work right now, right? They know the kids aren't in school right now. They know they're not supposed to travel, but they think it's like spring break. And I think that's the problem with the language we're using. I would love to tell people, stay the fuck at home. That's the answer. That's what we need to do. We all need to stay home. And I don't think that people are taking that seriously. I think there's a lot of propaganda out there that's telling people that they don't need to worry about this. And you know what that leads to? People dying. Your loved ones dying. This disease does not discriminate based off age or based off race or based off gender. We're seeing all different sorts of people who are contracting this virus, who are testing positive and showing a wide array of symptoms. There's people who are completely asymptomatic who are testing positive, who might be out in our parks right now spreading it to people who will show symptoms and who could potentially lose their lives. So I think that just stressing to people what social distancing means, changing the language to stay at home, that's what we mean. We mean stay at home. I think that that's definitely the largest steps that we can take. I think we need to shut down, again, all non-essential businesses and stop making exceptions I have a friend who works for a marketing firm and they're telling them they're an essential business and they need to come into work. And they've done this job from home before and now they're telling them they need to come in. There's people who are just pushing the guidelines, who are just interpreting them to suit their own needs, and it's truly disgusting. In Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf today finally announced a statewide stay-at-home order. He, prior to this, had been advocating for county by county. He had been implementing county by county stay-at-home orders, but finally today they made it statewide. So that was definitely helpful. I'm hoping now people are realizing how important is that the only way to flatten the curve is to stay at home and realize how fortunate, how privileged those of us are who are able to have homes to stay home at, who are able to have food in the fridge to eat while we're all stuck at home. We are very fortunate to have those things. A lot of people don't right now. So I think this is where we're really going to start a true sense of community, people coming out. And, like Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers, right? In any time of crisis, look for the helpers. And I've seen a lot of helpers around who are truly looking out for the best interests of their elderly neighbors or their immunocompromised neighbors. To me, that's what Allegheny County is to me. That's why I love it so much. That's why I call it home. Pittsburgh is my favorite place in the world, and I've been all over, and it's my favorite place to come home to because of this sense of community that we have. And so if we can combine that sense of community and taking care of one another with making sure that everyone stays at home unless a life depends on it, I truly think that we can be out of this sooner than later. Because, can you imagine 2 more months of this? Because I can't.
I certainly cannot. And I cannot think of a better way to end this topic, but I definitely add to the list that you proposed, tipping waiters for takeout, and also calling up relatives, FaceTiming relatives, texting relatives, especially elderly relatives who might be isolated right now. And I actually pointed out to a friend of mine a few weeks back that social distancing is a pro-life act. One of the criticisms of people who are pro-life is that they only care about babies in the womb. But I can certainly speak for myself when I say that by social distancing and helping those who may be immunosuppressed or elderly survive, I think that is a pro-life act.
Yes. That's why I'm concerned. I don't know if you've been following it, but there's been a lot of churches around the country who have openly been defying and telling their congregations to defy the social distancing guidelines and the stay-at-home mandates. And then next thing you know, we're hearing about an outbreak in their congregation, And so I just really wish that everybody would listen to science right now and listen to the CDC and the World Health Organization and listen to science, and if your elected official is not preaching science and instead preaching anything else, that's when we have a problem.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned Governor Wolf just a few minutes ago, and I actually asked you this question when we were practicing this, but how would you grade the response from the Allegheny County, from Governor Tom Wolf, and from President Donald Trump?
Okay. All right, so Donald Trump's the easiest. He gets an F-. I would actually give him an incomplete, which to me is a worse than an F-, because I truly believe that it is a direct result of his actions, of his statements, of his lack of action, that has led us to the situation that we're in right now, where our numbers passing every other country in the world with positive results for the COVID-19. I truly think that a lot of this is on him because he has the biggest bully pulpit of all of us. He has the biggest platform. His speech gets amplified louder than anyone else's. And he was denying that this was a serious problem as recently as a few weeks ago. And now here we are, right? So he definitely gets an incomplete F-, everything, okay? Next, Governor Wolf, I'm going to give a B+. Especially, which I actually think is an upgrade from last night, because my criticism earlier was that he was issuing county by county stay-at-home orders, and the virus does not know county boundaries. Okay, so the fact that he stepped up today and issued the statewide stay-at-home order, I'm going to give him a B+ for that. The Allegheny County. I'm biased because I'm part of it, right?
Of course.
I'm going to give a C+. Just because it's a little lower than the state, but I'm going to give it a C+ instead of just a C, because my complaints are a lack of transparency as to what's been going on. Anytime there's any accusations against the county regarding not doing enough or not acknowledging this population or not providing this support, the answer is always, oh, well, we're doing it, you just don't know about it. Okay, well then help us know about it. Be transparent about what you're doing, and this won't happen. Some of the downsides, of course, are the way that we are communicating amongst one another. A downside would be the fact that the county doesn't have the same authority that maybe the states have, and also the fact that the county is designed differently. We are a home rule charter county. We have a county executive and then a 15-member county council, whereas most of the other counties across the state have a county commissioner structure where they are the executive and legislative branch. So it's a little different. I think just the being a home rule charter county in general makes it more difficult to do the things that we need to be done, because we're fighting about who has the authority to do certain things in response to COVID-19, as opposed to actually legislating and implementing the legislation to get stuff done. So that's where the largest frustration is right now, is the lack of certain elected officials, certain members of the administration in Allegheny County to actually take proactive steps instead of reactive. So that's where my those are my grades for right now. Able to change if situations change. I would hope all of those grades improve over time throughout this pandemic, but we shall see. We'll have to do an updated one of these in a month or so.
We definitely will. I'm really hoping we can have you back, maybe to do a recap of the primary, because we're definitely going to talk about that before you go. But let's get to the fun parts. Let's talk about politics. When COVID-19 finally subsides, I'm sure you've had policy priorities that you have wanted to get done that have been put on hold as a result of COVID-19. What do you want to see get done when this is all over?
Oh my gosh, I have a lot. Are we talking about county? Like, what do I want to do at the county level?
Or policies you want to get passed at the county level?
Yeah, okay. So my big thing that I was working on prior is free jail phone calls. Okay. I'd love to see, we've implemented a free 5-minute phone call per person per day as a result of visits being canceled because of COVID-19. So I think we've shown that we can do it. Let's keep this going. That's one of the bright sides, I have to admit. If anything good has come out of this, it is the fact that we've realized that any of the arguments that we've heard against progressive ideals in the past are bullshit, right? Like, for example, the free jail phone calls is a perfect example. Everyone said, "Oh, are you sure you're able to do that? How are we going to afford it?" Well, we're doing it right now. You shut off visits and we're doing it right now. So why not any other time? We have this $2 trillion stimulus package coming out of the federal government. The same federal government that asks all the time, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Right? We bailed out Wall Street again with trillions of dollars. We're bailing out big corporations again with trillions of dollars. But you're wondering how we're going to pay for universal health care? Like, come on. So it's negated any comments that the conservative elected officials have against progressive ideals. So, if any benefit has come out, it's definitely that. Some other things I'm interested in working on, a living wage legislation for Allegheny County. It's something that had been introduced, almost 2 decades ago in the county council and didn't pass. So I'd definitely like to try it now, especially, realizing how many people do need a safety net here in Allegheny County. So whatever we can do to help them, that's definitely something that we're working on. My colleague, Olivia Bennett, who I mentioned, she's become one of my best friends. We work very well together. We have a lot of the same values, so it helps us in drafting our legislation. She actually is in the process of working on an anti-discrimination amendment to the regarding hairstyles. So right now we have an anti-discrimination clause in Allegheny County, but it doesn't include banning discrimination based off hairstyles. And Black folks are historically more susceptible to discrimination regarding hairstyles. And so she's adding an amendment to our current anti-discrimination legislation to make sure that hairstyles are included in that. So that's a really cool thing, that I'll be supporting as well. I mean, there's lots of things in the county. Air quality was something that's super high on my list, especially now when we're talking about how COVID-19, people in communities where air quality is worse, they're being hit harder with this virus because it is a respiratory illness. And we know how many people are suffering from COPD or chronic bronchitis or asthma as a result of the pollution in the air where they live. And so having those people now get infected with the COVID-19 is really showing how all of these things are tied together. So, increasing regulations regarding the number of air pollutants being emitted into the environment. I'd really like to see expanded access to public transportation. I finally just got a bus to my neighborhood for the first time in over a decade, so I'm really excited about that, but I didn't get to ride it because we got quarantined like a day or two before the route started. So there's a lot of things that we have in the pipeline to be ready to work for. Right now we're working on rent freezes. because evictions have been placed on a hold, but rent hasn't yet. And so Representative Summerlee and Sarah Innamorato, along with two of their other colleagues in the PA State House, have introduced rent and mortgage freezes at the state level. We want to work on a rent freeze here in Allegheny County, especially regarding the Allegheny County Housing Authority, subsidized housing we have and have so many people throughout the county living in. We want to make sure that not only can they not be evicted right now, because the courts have already said that, but we want to make sure that once this pandemic is over, once we've got through to the other side, that these people don't have 5 months of back rent to try to figure out how to manage. Because something that I say over and over again is, the COVID-19 pandemic right now is scary as hell, right? And we're all trying to figure out our way around it, our way of finding solutions for people who need it the most. But what I'm most scared about is what happens after this is over. That's my biggest concern. We might have this safety net up right now because of COVID-19, but we don't have that safety net all the time. We aren't talking enough about these provisions for people in other times. So as soon as this is over and the stay-at-home order is lifted and people go back to work and they go back to school and they try to go back to their lives, think about all the small businesses that are going to go under because of this. Think of how many jobs are associated with those small businesses, how many restaurants and how many main streets, how many mom and pop shops aren't going to be able to survive paying rent and mortgage and their utilities and all of their expenses during this. And so then when it's all over, people aren't going to have any work to go back to. And that's what really, truly frightens me, is what do we do after that? When people have 5 months of back rent, 4 or 5 months of back rent, when people have 4 or 5 months of back mortgage payments, when people lost their health insurance, because in this country, we tie our health insurance to our employment. So when folks lose employment, they lose their health insurance, the very thing that protects their livelihood, right? Like our country, our Constitution guarantees us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
But the Declaration of Independence, to be exact.
Right? And let me have health care.
No, there's a lot that I definitely want to respond to there, but I want to say that I agree with you. It is a very hard time to be a small government conservative right now.
For a while now.
Yeah, but let's talk about those issues like one at a time, starting with criminal justice reform, because I think this is actually the big thing where I largely agree with you. I think that we need to reduce sentences for nonviolent offenders. We need to make it easier for inmates to see their families. But I would say that where I draw the line is with people who commit violent crimes, like whether it's physical violence or sexual violence. It's there that I feel less sympathetic to those who are convicted of such crimes, because the way I see it, those people pose more of a danger to communities and individuals than people who just simply possess or use drugs. Can you tell me whether or not I'm wrong, and so how am I wrong?
Right. So I think that there's certain aspects of people convicted of violent offenses that we need to change. One thing that's important to note is when we talk about our legislation, we talk about the need to decarcerate right now as a response to COVID-19. We're talking about nonviolent offenders, right? We're talking mostly of people who have never, ever been convicted of a crime, are not charged with a violent crime. These are victimless crimes. These are people in jail for sex work. These are people in jail for drug possession. These are people in jail for things that did not have any victim associated with them, right? Non-violent crimes. These aren't domestic abusers. These are not murderers. These are not any of those things, right? So I think that that's an important distinction first. And then second of all, so when it comes to violent crimes, I mean, if we're just talking policy as a whole, not just COVID-19, right? So when it comes to people charged with violent crimes, there's a couple of things that I think are important to take in consideration. One of the things is I am completely against the death penalty, okay, for any crime, especially when we've seen so many cases overturned with new evidence after decades of of people being incarcerated, right? We've seen people convicted of crimes after someone else has confessed, after providing evidence that they were not even in the country at the time. We've seen a lot of instances of that all over the country. So first of all, it's important to point out that I'm completely against the death penalty. And to me, implementing a life in prison sentence on someone is another thing that to me is just another form of the death penalty, right? It's death by incarceration. They might not actually be doing lethal injection or electric chair or whatever it is people use now for the death penalty, but sentencing someone to life without the possibility of parole is a death sentence. It is death by incarceration, and that is also something that we need to end as well. The biggest focus that we should have is focusing on rehabilitation for people incarcerated, right? We call these facilities corrections facilities, right? That's the terminology that we use. But how is it corrections when they're not trying to correct any behavior? They're simply incarcerating people in cages. I want to see expansion of, you give people something to motivate them. You give people something to be proud of, to have pride in, to look forward to every day, whether that's teaching them a life skill, right? Teaching them how to be a carpenter or an electrician or an auto mechanic, when you teach people school, right? When you have educational classes available to those on the inside where they're able to get their bachelor's degree or their associate degree or their master's degree or a law degree. When you give people hope, that is corrections. That is rehabilitative. And that is what our correction system in our country as a whole is lacking in right now. I mean, in most jails that I've researched, here in Allegheny County as well, there are no programs for substance use disorder. There's no treatment for people suffering from mental health diagnoses. So what do you think is going to happen? People are going to reoffend because there's no help for them on the inside. So if we truly want to call this a criminal justice system, if we want there to be justice, if we truly want to call this a correction system, if we want to correct behaviors that have put people in jail in the first place, we need to completely restructure our correction system and our criminal justice system and give people that education and that motivation and, things to earn, to look forward to every day. That's truly how we rehabilitate society. And that's where we need to shift our focus. And when talking to my small government conservative friends, I remind them, how expensive it is to incarcerate people. How expensive it is to hold people in jail who have never been convicted of a crime. How expensive it is to hold people in jail while they're awaiting trial, right? There are people sitting in the jail in my Allegheny County jail right now who, if they had $100, they could be out on bond, but they don't. But our jail, it costs taxpayers in Allegheny County $100 per person per day that's sitting in the jail. So that's 42 cents of every cent of taxpayer dollars in Allegheny County goes to the jail. It is our highest single expenditure in the whole county budget. So when I talk to people who maybe can't understand from a criminal justice perspective, but instead can understand from a fiscal perspective, how much money we're wasting. For that person who could be out if they had $100 cash bail, after one day of being in jail, the county and the taxpayers have already spent more money than that person's bail would be for them to be at home with their families. And when they're at home with their families, they're able to get a job, and they're able to be a taxpayer and a contributing member of society, and they're able to support their family, and they're able to reinvest in their community with the money that they're making at their job. They're able to go and, go to stores and spend money in the community. So all around, to me, I don't see any rationale for why we are incarcerating people at the rate that we are. We have the highest incarceration rate in our country than anywhere in the world. Why is that? And I would argue that it's power, it's profit. It's profit over people. That's what it is. Our country is putting profits first instead of the lives and the humanity of people. And that's one of the things I ran to change, and I'm determined to do that.
I just want to say that I actually agree with you on the death penalty. And there are some, by the way, on the right who make the argument that there are some people who are beyond reform. And I completely disagree with that idea. I think that each and every one of us, regardless of what wrong we may have done, are capable of doing good. Right. And I think that our criminal justice policies should definitely reflect that idea. Let's talk about healthcare. There's definitely an ideological divide, not only between conservatives and progressives on the issue of healthcare, but also within the Democratic Party, because you have Joe Biden who's advocating for a public option, and then you have Bernie Sanders who's advocating for a Medicare for all system. Which one do you think is better?
Oh, Medicare question. Again, if COVID-19 has shown us anything, it's how dangerous it is to have healthcare tied to your employment, right? And so I hear this argument all the time from the more centrist, from the Joe Biden camps, right? Is that, people like their insurance. There is not a person in this world that likes their insurance. What they like is they like their doctors. That is what they like. That is what they want to keep. And they will keep that with Medicare for all. So I think that the nonsense of any argument against Medicare for all is just that. It's just complete nonsense. The only argument that I ever hear for people is, how are we going to pay for it? And I think we mentioned that earlier. We're able to bail out Wall Street. We're able to bail out big corporations. We're able to bail out everyone except working folks. Right? That's what it seems. And so the money is there. I never again want to hear a question of how are we going to pay for it when we have trillions of dollars to give to the stock market, hundreds of billions of dollars to give to big corporations. I don't want to hear that that's the argument against Medicare for all, because to me, that argument is null and void now.
So one of the concerns that I have against Medicare for all is in Canada, we have a similar system where we have a single payer system. And there have been stories of Canadians who have not been able to get care in a timely manner. And this includes the story of Laura Hillier from Burlington, Ontario. The story is online, but basically she had leukemia and she was matched with a bone marrow donor, but because she was on the bottom of a wait list, she was not able to get care, and unfortunately she died from the disease. And it's worth noting that in parts of Canada, there is somewhat of a move back towards a more private system. For example, in Quebec, the Supreme Court has ruled that private clinics need to be allowed to operate. And so one of the worries I have is that Medicare for all will lead to longer wait times for vital care.
So we already have that now. So I don't see how that is an argument against Medicare for all, because I know people who were on lists for a kidney transplant and died waiting on that list. And that's with our current private healthcare system here, right? Just the other day, there was a story in Pittsburgh. We've had 2 deaths in Allegheny County so far as a result of COVID-19. And this woman passed away without ever going to the hospital because she was from another country. She was here visiting her son, and she passed away because she couldn't get treatment. There was a story from another state, I forget where it was, where a 17-year-old boy passed away because he didn't have health care. He couldn't go to the hospital. I have doctor's appointments that I have to wait 6-7 months for. My mom has a doctor. She has to wait a year to get an appointment. So those are all problems that we already have. So if we already have these problems, let's hope that Medicare for all alleviates them, but they're already here. So why not get universal health care and have those problems instead of private insurance that people can't afford and have those problems?
All right, let's talk about college affordability, because I'm pretty aware that there are universities in Allegheny County. So I can just tell you where my position is. I am very much open to the idea of making community college free, because I recognize that a high school diploma is not enough to survive in this world, but I don't happen to think that 4-year college is the required. I think you can go to a 2-year program and still be successful. And also, the people who go to colleges are very much in middle to upper class. So my question is, if we make college free, how does that help the working class?
It helps us because we're all more educated, right? So one of my biggest disgusts with society is that it seems like no one wants us to be educated, because an educated population is a powerful population, right? And the more we educate people, the more solidarity there is amongst all classes, right? The more solidarity that there is amongst all people. And that's what I think the powers that be do not want. And I think that's why they advocate so much against free public education. So now remember, there will always be the Harvards of the world, right? There will always be the Yales and the Stanfords of the world, the Notre Dames of the world, the private institutions. I went to Duquesne University, which is in Pittsburgh, which is a private university. Those are not the schools that would be free. You could still pick if you want to pay $80,000 a year to go to a private university instead of getting a free education at Pitt or Penn State, that's on you. But it needs to be more than a community college, because the variety of course loads that are offered at community college are different than offered at four-year universities. And so we need to open up the options. We need to expand the options for people who want to get an education. And so that's why I think it needs to be all public education is free.
I just want to ask something about the primary system, because you have supported progressive challengers specifically to Democrats in Allegheny County that have one thing in common: they are anti-abortion or pro-life. And so I guess one of the questions that I have is there room in the Democratic Party for someone who is pro-life?
No.
Okay.
Simple question. I fully respect and appreciate reproductive justice for all, right? A person's right to choose what happens to their bodies, right? A person's access to menstrual products, right? A person's access to see their doctor, right? A person's access to all things reproductive health. That is a right. And again, I would classify that under our right to life. And one of the only ways to do that is to ensure that we have people who are pro-choice, right? There is no room in the Democratic Party. I would argue there is no room anywhere for people who do not respect a person's bodily autonomy. There is no room for that anywhere. And so, especially in the Democratic Party. And so I think we're starting to see that phased out over the years. Something that we've been seeing in Allegheny County, especially in this election cycle, is people who have always been very actively anti-choice, who are now trying to pander to the pro-choice crowd, when just as recently as last year, they were voting anti-choice. So we're seeing people who see the writing on the walls, but my concern is that they get elected into office and they do the opposite of what they campaigned on. So yeah, the answer is absolutely not. There is no room for anti-choice people in the Democratic Party or any party.
Another question that's probably going to get a simple yes or no answer. Should Allegheny County work with immigration and customs enforcement?
Absolutely not. And that is another thing that we will be working on legislation on after COVID-19 is over. When we have a little bit more resources to get that done, but absolutely not.
We had a conversation late last year about one of the policies that you advocate on, which is a county-wide ban on hydraulic fracturing. And one of the things that I guess I'd like to point out is that from 2005 to 2016, carbon emissions in the United States went down by about 15%, and a third of that drop was due to natural gas, which has less of a carbon output than oil and coal. And I often joke that if President Trump wanted to revive the coal industry, he should come out in favor of a nationwide ban on fracking, because what it will end up doing, at least as far as I can tell, is increase American reliance on coal and oil once again. And so I'm just concerned that if such a ban were to go into effect, it would increase America's reliance on fossil fuels instead of decrease it.
Yeah, that's not what we're actually advocating for with a nationwide fracking phase out, or whatever you want to call it. I hate to use the word ban on fracking because that makes that word so many people misinterpret when people hear fracking ban, like for example, Senator Warren, right, when she was talking about that, and Bernie Sanders have talked about that. What they actually mean is that we say there will be no new fracking wells and we will phase out the current ones over a period of time, whether it's a year or 2 years. It's not like we're just going to flip a switch tomorrow, And so I think it scares a lot of people. So I think it's important to talk about phasing it out. Because the most important thing, where the divide always is when we talk about phasing out fracking, is there's this divide between labor and the environmental groups, right? And so people think that you either have to pick between well-paying jobs or a healthy environment with clean air and clean water. And that is simply not the case. One of the biggest problems that I think has perpetuated this is that have you ever heard of like coding for coal miners?
Yes.
Yeah. So whenever the coal industry was getting phased out, different organizations were coming together to teach them how to code. Okay. So now, I have a friend who uses the example that her father's a teacher, right? If teaching were getting phased out, right, and he had to go pick a different job, work in a different industry, and you tell him that he has to go code, right? He was, let's say, a social studies teacher, and now you want him to be a coder. He's going to be miserable. What we need to do is we need to ask these people who are working in the oil and gas industries, what is it that you would be happy doing? Right? What is it? What career path? If you had to pick something other than oil and gas, what would it be? And then help them get into that field, right? We need to have the plan for a post-fracking world now. That needs to be a plan that we have now, that we're actually talking to the people who will be affected. There's a saying, nothing about us without us. Right? And it applies to a whole bunch of different groups of people, but specifically in this, why are we talking about getting rid of the oil and gas industry and making a plan for after it, unless we have people who are talking to the workers in the field and asking them, what else are you going to do? Because the idea isn't that we're going to go back to oil and coal. The idea is that we invest in renewable energy, right? The idea is that we invest in wind power, solar power, hydropower. We're investing in renewable energy fields, but we can't expect that everybody who's working on oil and gas is going to want to work in those fields. So what we need to do is we need to ask them, is this something you're interested in? Or tell us what else you're interested in and we will help get you trained for that, right? Nobody has to lose their job when we transition from oil and gas to renewable energy. That is the most important thing to be talking about, because that is the biggest argument against the fracking ban, right? And so as soon as we settle that and we assure people that no one will be making less money, right? Nobody will be less valued. Nobody will lose their good paying union job. We're just going to change it. And so I think that's what's so important for people to know, is this is about protecting everyone, protecting our workers, protecting our community members, diminishing the air and water pollution that we have right now from our natural gas industry, and just making sure that the world's a better place for everyone. So I definitely think that it's a possibility, but we need to talk about how we're framing the conversation, make sure that the right people are at the table when we're talking about the transition. It's a just transition, right? A just transition from the natural gas industry to the renewable fields. That is what is important. That is how we need to be framing it to people, to let them know that nobody will be left out, that we will make sure that everyone has a job to go to, that everyone has food to put on the table, that everyone receives a good paycheck and good health care and all the benefits that having a good union job affords you in this country. And that's the way that we get it done.
Well, I realize that we're on a bit of a time crunch right now. I have one more topic that I want to get to discuss, and it's one that I think is probably the most exciting. The June primary, the primary that was in April, but it's now been delayed till June 2nd. You have a number of races that you're watching. Please tell me what they are.
Ooh, yeah. So time to plug all my peeps. Okay, so we have, like we talked about earlier, Summer Lee and Sarah Innamorato. So Sarah does not have a primary challenger. She only has a general challenger. Summer Lee has a primary challenger who is backed by the county executive, who is backed by, the old school labor unions. But again, same thing as before. They have been through these battles in the past. They know how to win. If they can beat 20-year incumbents with everyone against them, they can do this. So I am definitely backing them as incumbents. I am really excited for Emily Skopov to take over Mike Terzai's. He was the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania, to take over his seat. He was one of the most, if not the most problematic person in the PA State House currently. He announced that he will be retiring from his seat. So it's an open seat. Emily Skopov ran 2 years ago for that seat, and she came within, I think, is 9.5 percentage points of beating him then. And now it's an open seat. She has the name recognition. She has the support. I think it's one of the 9 houses in the PA State House that we're able to flip this year to get a Democratic majority in Pennsylvania. Again, I think we referenced it earlier without saying their names. Emily Kincaid is a progressive challenger to State Representative Adam Ravenstahl, who has a history of anti-choice votes, who voted for HB 1100, which gives tons of subsidies to the fracking industry in Pennsylvania. So he is, not a friend of the environment, not a friend of the reproductive justice movement. And she is an attorney who has done a lot of work for, speaking for marginalized communities in her professional career. I think she has a great opportunity to win that seat. It is a district that I won in my primary by 30 points. And so I think that that's a great chance to truly get a warrior, a true fighter for the people in that seat. So that's another one that I'm really excited about. Another one that has been like a super hotly contested race lately is Jessica Benham. There was State Representative Harry Reedshaw announced he was retiring. He endorsed a candidate. I think you've read about this, Jonathan, because we've talked.
I think I did.
Yeah. State Representative Reedshaw, when he retired, he announced that he was endorsing a person for that seat after Jess had already been in that race running against him even before he retired. So one could say that she inspired him to step down. He was, again, a pro-gun, anti-choice candidate, elected official in the PA State House. We have a lot of problems with that in Pennsylvania. We call them dinos, Democrat in name only. So they are registered Democrats who vote like Republicans, right? So that's what we have a big problem with here in Allegheny County that we've been working on getting rid of, in all levels of government. But yeah, he is the definition of a dino. So he endorsed the person against Jessica Benham when he decided to retire. And then it was very quickly exposed that the person that he endorsed had posted very pro-Trump sentiments on her Facebook page, had posted anti-LGBTQ statements, anti-substance use disorder statements, just some really harmful statements against a variety of communities that she had publicly spoken out against. And so, I really, really, really am doing whatever I can to make sure that Jessica wins that seat, because we need a true champion for the Democratic ideals in that seat. We cannot have another person holding a seat as a placeholder, somebody who says they're a Democrat and who votes against all the things that the Democratic Party stands for. So that's my big four: Jessica Benham, Emily Kincaid, Emily Skopov. Oh, it's 5. Summerlee and Sarah Innamorato. Those are my big ones. That's where I'm going to be focusing my time right now. I have, fortunately 4 years till I have to run again. So I'm really spending my time making sure that I get some progressive champions to fight for the people of Allegheny County and for Pennsylvania as a whole. That's what I'm excited about.
Election Twitter, I hope you have been taking notes, because you guys have got some maps that you've got to put out when this primary happens. So let's just close with a zinger. Do you have any plans for future political office?
No. I've been in my office right now for 3 months. I get that question more often than you would think. And I think that one of my biggest complaints about politics is that so many people are so concerned with where they're going to go next instead of focusing on where they are now and how they can best use their position to help members of their community that they represent, right? So I have people all the time, especially when I'm fighting about criminal justice related things, people who tell me, oh, that's not popular. That's not something, those people don't vote. Those, telling me that this isn't an issue that I should take up. And I tell them, I'm not concerned about that. If I spend every minute of being an elected official, worrying about how I'm going to get reelected instead of fighting for and championing the causes that are important to me and are important to the people I represent, then why did I ever run for office in the first place? Why would you ever run for office if all you're caring about is being reelected or using your position as an elected official as a stepping stone to another place? So right now I'm super happy with where I am, and I have too much work to do on Allegheny County Council to be able to think about what's next.
Well, I think that represents the greatest type of politician, someone who's in it to help other people and not for themselves. Bethany, thank you so much for being on this.
Oh, no,
thank you.
I look forward to talking to you, and stay safe.
Certainly. We're going to have you back. Have a great rest of the day.
You have a better one. Take care.
Take care. And thank you to Bethany Hallam for coming on the show. Hopefully we'll have her back after the primary to do a recap. This has been Let's Talk About Things. Stay safe and good night.